Dasha, the world's most thorough and complete Dasha evaluation tool. On the first page, you can see a very simple nakshatra wheel because this is a report about nakshatra Dasha. But what you might notice right away about this wheel is there's not a whole lot of stuff on it. There's just one point on it, because the one point that you need to know to be able to determine nakshatra dashas is your reference point. And the interesting thing about this report is that when you're ordering it, you can choose whether you want that reference point to be the moon or the ascendant. Dashas are usually resolved in reference to the moon. But I've personally found in my own charts and in the charts of the people that I work with that the ascendant reference to dashas are a lot clearer. The report starts out with a note about it, about how to use it, because the thing about this report is that it doesn't make interpretations for you per se, but it gives you all the data that you would need to be able to make interpretations for yourself about your dashas. So since this is the case, I want to start the report by giving what I consider the most important interpretive tips. The first thing is keep your eyes on the trine. When you see positivity or negativity, conversely, in more than one of the trines, 1, 5, and 9, then you know that you have a very positive dasha going on. And the positivity of that dasha can apply to anything. So you wouldn't necessarily, for example, if you want to see when your career is going to go well, you wouldn't necessarily need to go looking for the 10th house all the time. Because if you have a period where 1, 5, and 9 are all very positive at the same time, you can get any kind of good result. A similar tip is that upachaya houses are also important, and they tend to indicate material gains. So upachayas are 3, 6, 10, and 11. So when you see positivity in more than one of those houses at the same time in the same dasha, then this is a time of material prosperity, growth, profit, etc. Conversely, if you see negativity or weakness in more than one of those, then you get the opposite effect. Another thing that I want to mention about interpreting dashas is that partners matter, and a lot of the things that people care about involve partners. So for example, marriage, business, you may have partners, childbirth, etc., etc., etc. So bearing that in mind, you have to realize that you have to check your partner's schedules as well and your partner's charts as well. So you might have a case where a marriage occurs and you don't have a prominent 7th house at that time. But you probably do have a good dasha overall, and your partner might have that prominent 7th house at that time. And the final tip that I want to give to people about using this tool for dasha interpretations is that you have to use the right tool for the right job. Dashas are a tool for understanding dasha. Dasha means a span of time. Certain things like marriage, childbirth, etc., they occur very quickly at particular instants, don't they? And so dasha is not really the best tool for predicting very short specific events. You want to use transits for identifying things like that. But the way that transits and dashas interplay with each other is quite important. And the basic tip about that is that the transits of the dasha planets are more significant. In other words, the transit of a planet is more significant if it's having a dasha at the same time that it's doing a transit. The first half, more or less, a little bit more than a half of the report is dedicated to the most universally applicable dasha system, which is the 120-year system called Vimshottari. So we start our Vimshottari analysis by looking at the biggest time periods in that system. Those are called the mahadashas, the great periods. And we start looking at the mahadasha by looking at this bar graph of the relative difficulty or ease of each period. So for example, this graph kind of makes it obvious to you that life starts off pretty good and then kind of takes a dip. and then improves and becomes even better than it was in the beginning, right? You can sort of follow the bar graph to get that overall feeling about overall life in general. The bars that are orange are negative scores, and then the higher the bar, the more intense the negativity or the positivity. Now, when we say negative, I mean counterproductive for conventional prosperity. So, for example, in a negative period, you're not going to get a lot of income, or you're not going to have a lot of comfort or luxury or ease. It doesn't mean that negative periods are not productive. You can grow a lot, learn a lot, improve a lot during negative periods. What a negative period really means is that you're not really getting tangible assets. After the bar graph, we get a table of scores for each house in each dasha. What this is doing is it's taking the bar graph and breaking it into more detail. The higher the number, the better the effect. The lower the number, or if it goes into negative numbers, the more difficult the effect. Negative numbers will be in orange cells, and then the higher numbers, I put them in darker cells so it's easier to spot them. Let me give you a few tips about how to use this table and the other tables that are like it in the report. The first thing that I recommend you do is you look for persistent patterns. Patterns of houses that are strong or weak over significant amounts of time. So, for example, we can see that throughout my life, this is my data, throughout my life, I'm pretty strong in 5, 9, and 12 houses, 5, 9, and 12, and also 1. And on the other hand, I'm consistently weak with houses 3, 11, 7, and 10. So that's your data that you need to be able to make a little bit more detailed interpretation than what we just did with the bar graph, where we're going to be able to say, here are the areas of life that are consistently strong for this person, and here are the areas that are consistently not strong. In this case, you have 5, 9, and 1. They're trines. So having trines be consistently good through life is just pretty good overall. It could make anything good. And it's because it gives good intellect and good education and good role models. Also, besides just the trine, we have 5, 9, and 12. And that trio, 5, 9, and 12, is very spiritual, and it's a proclivity for spiritual practice. On the other hand, we had weakness in 3, 11, and 7, and those are all three of the kama houses, the sensual houses. And then 3, 11, and 10, which are also a trio of weak houses, are upachaya houses. So we can make a prediction that kama houses are weak. Kama is weak for this person, and upachaya is weak for this person. Upachaya means accumulating. So this person, me, it's not really great with enjoying luxury and amassing wealth and money. Besides looking for these patterns, you can also kind of look for details. So you can also just look for a standout cell. So like look at 1991, and you can see that's where my 10th house was at its lowest point. It's a standout cell showing that particular dasha as a standout low point for the 10th house. And then if you look across that row, you can see that that same dasha is also a standout low point for my 3rd house. So now you can make an interpretation about that, and you can include the fact that this row, this period, this dasha belongs to Rahu, and Rahu represents sudden radical changes. So you can interpret that there's a lot of changes in the ambitions and the desires, because that's what 3rd house represents, and it has a huge bearing on what the 10th house represents, which is the ability to get notoriety, fame, and recognition and career. After giving the tables for the dashas, I also present the same data in a bar graph format, because this format makes it easier to compare the houses within a dasha. So for example, looking at this bar graph, it's pretty easy to see that even though this Rahu Dasha is difficult overall, it doesn't really affect houses 5, 9, and 12 much. 5, 9, and 12 are still prosperous during this Dasha. That indicates that really the only thing that's going well for this person during this Dasha is spiritual practice, spiritual learning. Now the same presentation of data is presented next, but now not for mahadasha, but for Antardasha. Antardasha are smaller periods within the main periods. So we have a house-by-house table, and we have a bar graph for the Antardasha in each dasha. And my tip here is you just use these tables and these graphs the same exact way that we just explored using them for the mahadashas. Similarly, after the Antardasha is a section on the Vimshottari, Prantardasha, like microdasha within the subdashas. So here we just have a table of the scores for every single Prantardasha. When you scroll your eye down through these tables, you'll see the shorter scale ups and downs that various houses go through. So remember, one of the ways to use the data table is to look for outstanding cells. And by outstanding, it doesn't have to just be absolute outstanding, like a very high number. It can be relative outstanding, like a number that's a lot higher than in the previous dashas and in the next dashas. So for example, take a look at the Rahu Dasha, Saturn Antardasha. It does not look good for the 7th house. There's low scores throughout that dasha for the 7th house. But there's one pratyanta or micro period within this Antardasha that has a spike in the 7th house. And that's the Rahu, Saturn, Sun Pratyantardasha. Interestingly, this is when I got married. Now, as a heads up, if you're going to make that kind of a prediction accurately, but without hindsight, then the most important thing for you to notice is that the 9th house was outstanding at the time and consistently so throughout Rahu Mahadasha. And so was the 5th and the 2nd and the 1st. Without this, then that little spike in the 7th house wouldn't really have been enough to warrant a prediction of marriage. It's especially important that the 9th and the 2nd house were strong while the 7th house had a spike. And also going back to the point of using the right tools for the right job, it wouldn't be wise to only rely on the dashas to predict a very short event like a marriage. You would want to say, this dasha looks really good for marriage. Is there a transit in this time period that works really well for marriage? If you find that, then you can make the accurate prediction. Now, the next section of the report is about alternative dashas. Besides the ubiquitous 120-year Vimshottari system, classical texts like Brihat-Parashara, they define 9 other nakshatra-based dasha systems. Each one starts from a different nakshatra and has dasha of different durations in different orders, and also has a certain condition that needs to be met in order for that dasha system to be considered relevant to a particular person. So for example, if your ascendant is in a Venus-ruled Navamsha, then the 112-year system, Vimshottari, is relevant to you. So after having completely disclosed the results of the Vimshottari Dasha, Antardasha, and Prantardasha, now the report moves on to check which of these 9 other alternative systems are applicable to your chart. For example, the report finds that the 108-year system, Ashtotari, is relevant to me. The reason is that I meet the condition for Ashtotari, which is to be born during the day while the moon is waning. And so the report then gives the familiar bar graph and data table, but now for the Ashtotari mahadashas, and also for the Antardashas. Now, not every system is going to apply to everyone. So for example, the report finds that the 116-year system, Shodashottari, isn't relevant to me. The report still gives the mahadasha data, even though the system isn't relevant to this chart, just because people are curious. Now, after having disclosed Vimshottari Dasha and having assessed the alternate dashas that are applicable, the report comes to what I think is probably the most exciting or interesting or important part, which is the compositing of all the applicable dasha systems. So it starts off with this bar graph which shows how the mahadashas of all of the applicable dasha systems for you line up together. A lot of things jump off the page when this information is visualized like this. So for example, it's really easy to spot this span of time where Rahu is extremely dominant for me. And there's other things which might be less obvious, but it's also, you can see spans of time where there's two benefics operating simultaneously. So like every dasha has a benefic planet operating. So in the case of the Rahu period, you would easily predict that this is an upheaval time in the person's life. The person is doing unusual things. Not just because it's a Rahu Dasha, but because it's Rahu Dashas on all the Dashas simultaneously. Whereas in the other case with the two benefics, you would say, the person is finally, after this Rahu Dasha, this person is finally getting some benefic effects. They're establishing good things in their life. After that bar graph, we have a composite graph of the positivity of each year of your life. So this data comes by summing up the mahadasha and Antardasha of every applicable dasha system during each year of your life, starting from your birth year and going for 100 years. So what this format does is it makes it easy to spot the generic or the general ups and downs. So for example, it's pretty easy to see 1992-1993 was a tough period. Not just because the bar was low, but because it remained consistently low. And so, to a lesser extent, we can say that 1998 and 2003 were also difficult. And you can find other years that have low bars. But 1992 and 1993 are really significant because they're back-to-back. When you have the same effect persisting for longer time, it's more intense. Similarly, you can look for high points. On what you can see right now, you can only see 1972 and 75, but that would suggest this person had a pleasant childhood. Now, after that, we break the same data down into the familiar table format so we can see how the positivity or negativity pertains to specific houses and therefore specific topics in life. So we can drill down now into 1992 and 1993. And we can see how here the difficulty about these years is coming from houses 3, 7, 10, and 11, and it's not coming from the other houses. So this would help you say what's difficult in 1992 and 93 is this person can't fulfill their ambitions. And they're being troubled by their ambitions. They're being troubled by their desires. They're not really forming relationships. They might be breaking relationships because the seventh house is also weak. They're not really achieving notoriety, fame, or money for their efforts. Finally, the report gives a technical list detailing which planets were active during which years so that you can understand the data that went into forming the two previous tables. This is mainly for people who really love details and want to know exactly what's going on under the hood. On that note, about people who really want to know details, the report closes with like an appendix as a technical section that reveals all the underlying calculations and the rules involved in making all these judgments about how positive or negative the houses will be during particular dashas. So first we evaluate each sign of the zodiac using rules from the beginning of Paladipika chapter 15, and the rules are detailed in the report in this section. Then after we've evaluated the 12 signs, we convert those signs to houses by making them relative to various lagnas or focal points. So we use the ascendant primarily, the moon secondarily, and tertiarily we use the karaka of a particular house as the ascendant for that house. Then the third step is we evaluate rules from the later half of Paladipika chapter 15 to determine each planet's effect on various houses during its dasha, and the specific rules being used are notated in the report. Then the data that's actually used on those tables and on those bar graphs are the composite of these scores. The final page of the report shows the most fundamental calculations that the report relies upon, the dignity and strength of the planets, and these calculations are exactly conformant with Paladipika's chapter 3 and 4. So not only is this the most thorough and complete tool available for evaluating your dashas, it's also the most authentic because it is really directly right from Brihatparashara Shastra and Paladipika. You can get this report for your own birth chart right now. It's available. Just go to victorcarrot.com, click into the reading section, and then select the Dasha reading.